Welcome to Slow and Steady, the podcast where you get to follow along as we build products in public. Each episode gives an honest peek into our lives as we share our struggles, our wins, and everything in between. I'm Benedict, and I'm feeling okay.
And I'm Benedicte. Today is March 18th. This is episode number 219, and I am feeling scattered.
That's also an interesting feeling. Why are you feeling scattered?
I don't know if it is on the official feeling wheel or not, but I think it's basically just I've had a super focused 2 weeks. A lot has happened. I was looking over my planning. I've been done on everything I was supposed to do over the last 2 weeks. And that kind of just always ends up in a week where things are not as focused, and I'm should I be working on that or that, or oh, I want to work on this, I want to I don't know, my brain kind of needs a week to just do
so you're not necessarily scattered, but not as focused as the previous 2 weeks.
but also a little scattered. What should I work on? What do I want to work on? And after being so focused, often I feel my brain is well, I want to do what I want to do. Screw your plans. Right. So I was supposed to work on the Viz integration for Outseta, which is a Webflow thing. But what I've been working on is the Astro demo because I wanted to do some coding. So it's probably not a higher priority. I think Viz is a higher priority because we have a lot of Webflow people. But my brain was nope, we are productively procrastinating with this other thing instead.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I can see how that makes you feel scattered.
Yeah.
I usually try to avoid just doing that of I'll just quickly do this as a side project because it never, at least for me, it never works out that way.
Well, at least it's on the list. It was just further down the list.
Fair enough.
So, but then it's also, I was trying to work on Galleon tools, which is our new thing. Been trying to do that slow and steadily and push that off until we go sailing. But then the last couple of days I got really energized on that. And that is also a little scattered because it's so much in the beginning where you're what is it that we're going to make? What is the important thing to make first? All of that kind of stuff. So, my brain just takes me in all kinds of directions research wise. So I guess that also feeds into that scattered feeling, which isn't necessarily bad because I have to do research in multiple directions and kind of see what's out there, make some hypotheses of what people would need and those kinds of things. And when kind of that comes over you and you're ready to dig into those things, it's also something to grab that energy and start digging into what is out there and looking at things and signing up for things and kind of just being a sponge.
Right.
Yeah, but then you don't need to do too much of that. So it's a little bit all over the place this week.
Yeah, you just have to make sure that eventually you end up being focused again.
Well, that's what I think. Before, I would probably be very, oh no, now everything is down the dumps. I'm not as focused. And it's been 2 days. So, but I don't know. I kind of know that I could see it coming, being so focused and getting so much done that there will be a week where less stuff gets done, and that's okay. So
yeah, totally. I can relate to that. I feel even most of my weeks, Mondays and Tuesdays, especially weeks when we are recording the podcast, are very, very scattered because there's just calls sprinkled throughout the days, and then you don't necessarily have enough time to focus on anything in particular. Therefore, you just dabble a little bit in this, dabble a little bit in that, and just don't get big chunks done. But I guess eventually, there's always Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Always.
I feel the worst part is when you really become productive Friday afternoon, and then it's the weekend and you're supposed to not work.
But then you're I have the momentum. But then if you work all through the weekend, you're going to crash on Monday, and then you're going to be scattered again until Thursday. And then what's going to happen? You're just going to perpetuate the cycle. But one of the things that I found out, which is super encouraging in a way for our ID for Galleon Gateway. So I'll try to explain what my vision for Galleon Gateway is, and that is that you sign up for Galleon Gateway, then you select whatever auth provider you have in your business. So that could be Outseta or MemberStack or Clerk. So this will be for more of the smaller type businesses that are typically Outseta customers. And then you select your data source, which could be Airtable, Superbase, Notion, or a Google Sheet type thing. And then you can configure basically row level security to start with, but some kind of like authorization where you say, okay, people with this thing has access to these rows, or they only have access to these rows if their user ID can be found under the user ID column, that sort of stuff. And I was like, one thing, it's a little bit scary because I don't really want to go into security because that brings out all the bad folks. But what I've seen now after testing the hottest thing since sliced bread, vibe coding, which is like letting your AI just do stuff for you and just accept everything, is that the security is just so bad. And I also found and I don't want to blast people, but like I found a company that showed the demo of kind of how to do this. And they said just use the Superbase service key because then you can just skip row level security, which meant that I could basically go in and delete everything in this demo SaaS that they had created. So there's definitely like a need or a gap or something here, but then the question is, are people looking for it and how to like grab them when they come looking for it? But we do have I know we've had at least one customer in Outseta who really, really wants to grab data from Airtable because he's running kind of like a consultancy thing. And he's done all these operations in Airtable. And then he was like, oh, I just want to have a web page where I can show them, their status from Airtable. And that's impossible right now. Or it's not impossible. You have to write a serverless function or a server function of some kind and do this. So I kind of want to make it like super easy breezy to just say like, I use Outseta, I have Airtable, choose this table or base, I think they're called in Airtable, and just do some basic row level security that is kind of like understandable, even if you're pretty new to this space. And I'm still not like at expert levels. I feel like I still have a little bit of empathy and like understanding of how it is to not kind of get this, that you have to secure this on the server side. You can't just put your Superbase service key in your browser code because I can delete your whole app. And there was I'll put a link in the description. It's been like vibe coding security kind of took a hit over the weekend where a guy who was like been very vocal about vibe coding his whole SaaS. That basically happened. Luckily, people were nice enough not to delete all his data, but they went in and just like changed a lot of the like his customers' data. And he was like, I'm under attack. And like most people who are more experienced are like, you're basically not really under attack because this is like they haven't really had to do anything to figure this out. Like it's been right there. I guess it's an attack, but it's not like
it's like it's one of those things like, I got robbed, yes, but you had your doors open. Like, yes. What did you expect, right? I mean, it's kinda still like robbery, but it's kind of like, you didn't actually do anything to prevent it.
It's one of those things where you boast on social media that you're on vacation and then everybody knows that you didn't lock your doors. So then in the end, the thief is going to get that information and come rob you because you've been boasting about leaving the house in a hurry and you often forget to lock the door. And then it's like, oh, okay, let's go and see what we can find there. But anyways, I feel kind of optimistic that there is something to this idea of Galleon Gateway because then they could start vibe coding in a way, but then they could decide to just run all of the requests through our gateway instead of doing And in the beginning, I thought it was only going to be towards those services that kind of don't have this, like Airtable. Like you can't, like they don't have a concept of row level security, and you can't bring your own auth. So I was thinking it would only be for that, but I can see like a lot of no coders are using Superbase now, and they don't kind of understand the whole row level security setup. It's pretty complex if you're new. So then I was like, okay, we could even do it towards Superbase, and kind of like have an easier way of integrating other auths than Superbase auth, like, like Outseta or Clerk or other other types of services. So anyway, so then I was like fired up and like, we need to like actually get started. I want to get like a super, super minimal demo just going where you like select Outseta, of course, which will be our first auth integration. And then Airtable, which I do have some experience now with from my work at where we use an Airtable extensively, and just like kind of like see it and get a feel for if this is, manageable at all for me to do.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds super straightforward, or like a very obvious thing. The problem, I guess we talked about this when you first pitched the idea. Is like, will you find people that are like, will you find people who are ready to buy this, or like how do you get us in front of them? Because as you said, like most people that are in that target audience might not necessarily know that they need something like this. And why should they care if they can just put their service key into their front end code and like it works? Like there's no problem. So why start looking for a solution there? I mean, maybe after they got hacked, then they will start figuring out, oh, maybe. And then I guess your marketing material could be stuff like, I got hacked. What do I do now?
Yes, but then I also think there is an entryway where people are looking for, say, Outseta plus Airtable. Like,
right.
Like how can I combine the tools that I'm already using? And they're in that research phase and not just vibe coding. And so like trying to kind of hook into that, kind of that research or like those kinds of questions.
Right. So instead of having them find the tutorials where they need to write like some server-side functions on Lambda or whatever, present that easier solution where they just like click a couple buttons and wire up a few things with a few clicks. I could see that working as well.
And I think like stealing Pierre's strategy from Scraping Bee, where he then answers how you do this the hard way. Like I can then write an article about, okay, if you want to combine Outseta with Airtable, you need to, create a serverless function that verifies the Outseta key and then grabs data from Airtable and filters out the data that shouldn't be accessible to the person who owns this Outseta, access key, and like write the full tutorial. And then in the bottom, it's like, or
or just click
a screenshot of like how easy it would be with a Galleon gateway. And I remember had several conversations with Pierre about this, about like how much traffic that brings them as Scraping Bee, because people are wondering, how do I scrape data? And then they answer it. It's not like a bait, like a lot of SEO stuff is, where it's just like, a bait title and it only sells the solution. But they're like, you have to download Puppeteer, you have to do this, you have to do that. And then just like at the end, just a nice reminder that it could be easier.
Yeah, I always appreciated that approach. Like that's super helpful. And then just like surfacing the very easy solution where you just don't have to worry about any of the stuff.
Yeah.
Another example that comes to mind is URLbox for like screenshots of websites. And I'm not sure where exactly it is on a website, but I have a claim somewhere that something like 80% of their customers had their self-built solution before they decided to ditch it and just sign up for their service. I really like that one, because it's also one of those things where it sounds easy in the beginning, and then you realize, but I want to hide the cookie banners, or this just renders when JavaScript is enabled, or I don't know, stuff, right? And you don't know what you don't know. I guess that's it could be the title of the episode, because I feel like a lot of this relates to this is basically the root cause of those vibe coding security incidents. I guess maybe even of all the security incidents, that there's stuff yet you don't know that you don't know, and therefore forget about them, or like don't do them, and then someone knows and can exploit those.
But and it's always been like that. Like, we've all done mistakes, but I feel like coming from a more traditional background, like I knew this stuff is hard, or like I knew this stuff is important in a way, but it feels like the kind of the discourse around this like vibe coding thing, which lowers the barrier, which I also really like, but it also kind of just pretends that a lot of things aren't hard or not hard, but like there are a lot of things that need to be correct, not like partly correct or sometimes correct. They have to be correct. And there has to be a strategy, and there has to be some thought behind, what you want to happen and what kind of access you want to give people. But it also just makes me, in a way, feel like it's time to just be bolder. Like, okay, because I kind of feel like I don't have the authority to make like an authentication gateway. But then you look at some of these things and you're like, well, I wouldn't do that. So
like, maybe it's not perfect, but it's definitely better than that.
And like, if they can, maybe it's time that I just, realize I can.
Yeah.
And then also know that I should ask for help and get like, if this takes off, I would spend time and money to talk to people who are even better at this than me to make sure that. But I've been thinking through it in many ways, and it's like, I know this part of authentication authorization. Like I do know this pretty well now. But it's like owning up to that and being like, here's my product that will help you with that. But yeah, and just a quick note, because I promised last time that we would have the first version of our Galleon Attributes out, and it is available. And you can test it out on Webflow. Just check the description. Yes.
I'll have to look at that. I mean, I've never used Webflow, but I just need to look at what you came up with.
So it's only GET requests at this point, but you can get data and you can bind data just using data attributes. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out.
Nice.
And that's also kind of a marketing way in. Like, I hope that it can become a fun open source project that Webflow folks can use. And then that could also be, a gateway to Galleon Gateway.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because there inevitably the question will come up, like, how do I exchange this token for that token? It's like, well, you could do it with all this code, or I have this little service over here that you could pay for.
Yep. Maybe there's even a thing for like the big central token exchange or something like that. We could just like exchange tokens from different no-code services to authenticate people around all those tools.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that's what you're building, right?
Well, I think in the beginning it won't be exchanging but it will be at least, verifying the, for instance, Outseta token and then using a service key on our side, but making sure we don't do bad stuff with the service key.
Got it.
Yeah. But there's also a case for that kind of like exchange situation, which could also be like an interesting Galleon product.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. So
I also spy that a certificate in your background there.
Oh,
I think it says something winner.
You want me to brag?
Yes, I want you to brag.
I am one of Norway's 50 foremost tech women or leading tech women.
Woohoo!
2025. So
That is amazing. Congratulations.
thank you so much. It was
What else came with that certificate? Was there like a lot of money and like champagne and a car or something like that?
unfortunately no. It was just an honor
Ah,
and a diploma.
well, not too bad either.
And a kind of like an award ceremony where we were given our diplomas, where I brought the family, and it was super nice. And I don't know, I went from being like, oh, it's just an award, and first I thought it was a spam mail because it looked so weird. They like wrote it with, where they like bolded sentences and made it red, like inside the email. I was like, okay, this is I'm just going to ignore this. And then a second one came in, and then I remembered my friend had said something. I might have said this before, but I remember my friend had said something about an award that she nominated me for. And I was like, didn't Marit, and then I asked her and she was like, yeah, I did. And I was like, okay, well, I'll answer the people. But it was still like a little bit, like, yeah, this is fun, but it's not like that important. But then I kind of started talking to people, and people were like, wow. And then I started seeing the press around it. And then I just thought to myself that maybe I shouldn't just like not ignore it, but like talk it down or talk it. Because it's easy when you get something like this to be like, well, we're not
it's
that
not that important.
It's not that
Doesn't mean
important, and like anybody could get get it, or it's not this meaningful. But then I was like, you know what? Maybe I should just like be proud and feel honored. And when I was there, and like there was a lot of the other women in tech, like when we started talking about role models and what that's meant to us in our own career, like I started to think about why I chose tech, and like obviously had to do with role models, but also my neighbor who was my science teacher in high school that nudged me over to actually apply. But my mom, as we talked about, was a CTO at one point, or a developer, then CTO. So for me, like choosing tech was just like one of the normal choices. It didn't feel like a particularly brave choice, and that's what I wanted to feel like for the next generation. That all the like little girls in Lillian class know what I do, and just feel like that's one of their choices. Like they don't have to, but it's not like
it's not impossible, or it's like not for them. I feel like that's always the saddest thing with career, like when people or like kids don't see a thing that they might like, or like they might think it's interesting, but then think, but it's not for me because I don't fit in whatever box that is used to you. Like that's commonly referred to with that job, and that's kind of sad. So,
or like the box that they made in their mind just by like like the people they see.
Yeah, by just like looking at what they see, right? I mean, yeah, you make up your. I guess we all have our boxes, right? That we put stuff in, but some boxes are pretty colorful, and some maybe a little bit boring. But the more variety you get, and the more you see people like you that you can identify with, I think that's inspiring. So, thumbs up.
Thank you.
I'm very proud of you.
And then there was also a 3-minute movie that was made. We'll put the link in the description where you can.
Was that the thing that you hinted to last time?
Yes. So it was like 6 hours. It turned into 3 minutes of a video where I speak about myself and what I do in Norwegian. So if you understand Norwegian or not, the videographer was very good. So there's some really nice pictures of our neighborhood and kind of what I do. So we'll put that link as well.
Yeah, put that in the links. I want to see your neighborhood.
Yeah. And also I feel like it came at the right time, because finally ready to kind of step out into the community in Oslo again. I've tried like every now and then during my mom's illness, but now that I've rested up, I feel like I've finally have kind of like rested up and want to be more outgoing and meet more people. It's helpful that like all of Oslo's tech community on LinkedIn has seen my face plastered with the title, because it just makes it easier to go out and like talk to people, and also makes it easier
Yeah.
not to have to start at the level where they're like, do you even code, kind of, which can happen sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think it came because if it happened last year, I wouldn't have like been able to kind of go out and use
Capitalize
it.
on it. Yeah. Makes sense.
But now I can. So, but let's talk about you, because it's been me this episode that I was the one who got that.
Yeah, you got the award. Like, you deserve it. I didn't get an award, unfortunately. But what happened? Yeah, with me. Let me think about it. Yeah. So, okay, I've been pretty focused. I might have mentioned this last episode as well, but we're kind of in wrap up mode of just like finishing all our little projects that we started in Q1. And one of those things was writing API documentation for our transactional email endpoint that's coming up. We actually enabled it for one customer last week. Did we? Should probably double check. I had a plan to enable it for one customer, but maybe we didn't. Just write that down.
Customers like waiting. You're like, where's my API access or my email? Transactional email.
So
access.
yeah, it's basically done. I was last week spending the time on, actually the last 2 weeks, writing documentation for that. And in the process, we also decided to just revamp the documentation we have for our entire API at the moment, because the version that's still online to this date for our documentation, API documentation, is basically just a document with a lot of prose, and it's not bad in the sense of like that it doesn't tell you how it works. It's actually pretty good because it's very detailed and high level strategy and what to think about and stuff like that. But it does not look like the traditional API documentation where you can just jump to a thing and just get the raw details without a lot of fluff around it, right? And I feel like as developers, most of the time we don't really care about the fluff. Like, we just show me the code, like just show me the endpoint, and that's it, right? So we didn't really have that, and we now, well, not deployed yet, but it's getting there. It's basically done. We now have that, and it turned out pretty nice. And in the end, it only took 2 days or so to get most of it done. I have to admit, though, that I probably wasted a week trying to build a fancy version of it, or like do it what I considered the proper way initially. And that specifically is using the Open API spec, which is supposed to be like that standard to document your APIs. And I've used it a little bit here and there over the last couple of years to basically write a documentation for our push API. However, when it came to generating documentation for it, it just was not, it wasn't great. Like, yes, it was technically correct. It did like it had support like that, or like the spec was reflecting all the possible combinations that you can do with our API accurately. But because it's so flexible, there's a lot of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but like there's a part of the spec is basically JSON schema, which is a way to describe data structures in JSON. Like describe JSON data structures by more JSON. And that has a concept of like where you can like have stuff like it needs to adhere to all of these criteria or one of them or like any of them and stuff like that. So you can describe everything pretty flexibly. But when you generate documentation out of that, you basically get the same thing. And then you have like a toggle button that you can click and you get like 5 slightly different versions from it. And as a human looking at this, you're like, huh? Like, what's going, why? What's the difference between this and that? And ultimately, what it boiled down to in our case was just like, if you send user data, you either have to provide an identifier or an email address. you can do both, but one of them has to be there. But because the JSON schema thing only supports required as a flag, there was no way to tell the thing that do either or. Like, I mean, sure, there was a way to tell it, but like not in a human friendly way. So I basically spent a week of like trying to come up with clever ideas how to make this human readable, and then eventually decided to like throw it all away.
Make it by a human.
Just like in a way, we came up with our own spec format, so we're still writing a YAML file with all the objects and the properties, but now the required field is a string. We can write whatever and just like be explicit and describe what it's actually doing. So that was my little rant about about specs and schemas and stuff like that. And for the purpose of documenting it for humans, it just didn't work. So gave up on it, and now we have a pretty nice setup.
That is interesting, because at some point I will have to dig into the Outseta API documentation, because it's I'm not sure how they made it the first time, but it's in Postman, but it's like incomplete response examples and incomplete, like almost all of it is a little bit incomplete. But there are some like we have some basic kind of object, because it's an automatically generated API from like the objects in .NET, some kind of .NET framework. So I think if we document all of the kind of objects very well, we can refer back to them. And I don't think like that is possible in Postman, where you have to then like repeat yourself every time you're going to do a response. Because if there is a person object in this response, it's always going to have all of these things, and we don't want to document that again and again and again. But my idea, at least, was to give Postman a proper go, like learn it properly, since we already have a lot of things in it. But then if not, just go more of the manual route, where you can kind of, because it's also a little bit about glossing over the parts nobody really uses. If they always use email to find people, you can have a little note that says, oh, you can send in the identifier, but having that like be, I mean, it's technically correct that they're the same thing, but like everybody will use the one thing. Like, let's document that more prominently. But it also feels like an impossible task to document it without like auto-generating things. So what I've done now is started on this like tiny document that I call API katas, or like get to know the API, where I just ask them to do the typical requests as like a getting to know the API. Because there are some issues that we're seeing in support that are coming again and again. So I was hoping to have like, I think it would be like 10 requests that you can do one after the other. And like it gives you a good understanding of most of how the rest of the API works. So that when people are having issues, it's like, okay, start over there and like do these requests first, and I'll explain the results, and I'll explain what will happen and what should happen in that document. So it's at least a little sidebar before I fix the actual documentation.
Yeah. But I'm pretty sure you'll run into some of the same problems that I ran into with all of these. Because as I said, like, it's supposed to be the go-to. I mean, unless I missed something, but it seems to be the most popular way to document API. Well, the most popular standard, I want to say, to document those types of APIs.
I haven't seen any good API documentation that uses OpenAI spec directly transformed into API.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it boiled down to. Like, I looked at a lot of those generator tools. I looked into like building our own generator tool and stuff like that. And I mean, I don't want to trash the spec too much. Like, I think it's still valuable, and it's still kind of cool, because it does support like references and stuff like that. So you don't have to repeat yourself. But also in some parts it's just too inflexible, which I guess it kind of has to be if you also wanted to generate code. So I don't know, like it didn't work out for us or for this particular
because
use
I
case.
think it's used a lot to generate SDKs. So if you do
Right,
document your
yeah.
API properly, you can generate an SDK without having to manually code your different languages
Yep.
SDKs.
Yep.
But I've always had to use an SDK, and now I'm at the stage where I'm like, I'm just skipping these SDKs because they do nothing but wrap
Yeah,
it in Axios, and then it's the wrong Axios version that has a security
exactly.
vulnerability and blah blah blah. And then I'm like, well, what if I just do a request to the endpoint that I know is under here somewhere?
And especially if you're just like barely scratching the surface of the API, right? Like, I mean, in userlist, we're using the Stripe Ruby wrapper because we're calling a lot. I mean, relative to the size of the Stripe API, we're still probably just calling a tiny slice. But I feel there's plenty of stuff that we do with the Stripe API to warrant like having a dedicated API wrapper. But then again, we use other APIs. For example, one of the transactional email providers we use, like it's always the same HTTP call to this one endpoint with this one data structure. It's not going to change ever. And yeah, just then importing like an auto-generated SDK that's not, and that's one of my problems with most of these auto-generated SDKs. It's like that isn't idiomatic and like just looks like a sore thumb in your code base. We're like, why is the naming pattern all wrong? Why is I don't know, why just doesn't it fit? And then it just is an annoyance. And then, I don't know, it uses stuff that prevents you from upgrading to newer versions and stuff like that. And we're back to that old discussion of, do you really need so many dependencies? And when it's better to just like roll your own and when it isn't. It's such a hard balance to strike of like building your own versus just like using a library. I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't want to go on a detour too much on this.
No, but I think
Yeah.
especially as I said, the auto-generated ones, because they usually don't give you anything in addition. Like,
Yeah.
you have to do all of the data wrangling yourself anyway to like put into this SDK version. Then you can just use the API directly. But some SDKs do more, where it's like, oh, if you're authenticated, it remembers that you're already authenticated, and it will like add that to all requests, or it will have some sort of like memory baked in where it just makes it so much easier to do subsequent requests. But a lot of the auto-generated ones don't, and you're just like, well,
yeah,
I'm getting no help here.
yeah, exactly.
But
That, funny enough, like brings me to another thing that I dabbled around with in the last couple of days. And one thing I want to mention is that AI has been super helpful in like writing those like the API documentation, because it was really easy to just tell it to, hey, update all the examples with that new information or stuff like that, and we just like edit the entire document, and I don't have to go in there and do every single thing. Or, for example, we now also have like code examples in different languages, and using some of our libraries and some just pure HTTP libraries. And it was super easy to just tell it, hey, in addition to the 5 language we already have, please also add one in this language. It was just add them, and we're done with it. So that was super useful. And I got inspired by that. And given that I don't like auto-generated SDKs based on those specs, I was like, hey, what if I open basically, I have a folder on my disk where we have subfolders with every single SDK we have for those different languages and frameworks. And I was like, maybe let's try this vibe coding thing. So I told it to write a new library for a different language. So I just made updates to the PHP library, and it was like, yeah, okay, let's just vibe code the Python version of this. And it was very like twofold. It was very impressive, but it also was a lot of crap. So I prompted it. I gave the agent mode in VS Code. Like the preview release of VS Code has this agent mode that would like just like search files on your disk and run command line code after you approve it. And it was impressive to see how it set up a new Python library, created at least some of the necessary files, would also create tests for them, then tell me like it was basically asking me, hey, I want to run the test now using this command. Is it okay? And then you click like, yes, it's okay. Test would fail. It would look at the test results and be like, oh, the test did fail. I need to adjust them. So I did adjust the test, asked it to run again, and went through the cycle a couple of times until it had like 40 tests or so. They were all passing. So that part was impressive. And then I looked at the actual code, and then it was less impressive because it was using the wrong API endpoints. It forgot half of the actions that you can perform, and like used the wrong authentication theme, didn't use the correct API tokens and stuff like that. So it was a glimpse into a future that might be useful, but the only thing I could do with this at the end was just delete it. I mean, maybe I could have done like a couple iterations, but I guess at some points it's like diminishing returns. And I could just like come up with the files one by one on my own. But it was an interesting experiment, at least. So yeah,
I find
maybe I'll
it
give it another try in a couple of months.
it's weird where it often gets started really well. And then especially if it like creates its own test, or like if it wants to do some kind of quality control itself, I feel like it just goes into a loop where it just creates more and more and more code to fix an often almost imaginary issue, which is the issue that they've that they indicated or that they found at all. So it's you got to be careful, but it's so enticing, and it feels like you're doing so much, and you're just like vibing along, and it's good times, and
yeah, and like I think what is dangerous, or what I noticed in myself while doing this, is that maybe the first couple of prompts you're still looking at everything and trying to make sense of everything, but it's kind of boring and like mentally taxing. Like you have to really focus and think about the edge cases. So I noticed that over time as I was doing this, like I was like not looking that closely anymore and like just accepting, as you said, like just vibing it. And in the end
you
got a
your whole
library
computer
with
because
like
you said yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, I focused on those at least.
That happened to some users with Claude or Cursor, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where it bricked computers.
I didn't really see about the brick computers. I only saw one where it messed up the code base enough that it wouldn't work anymore.
Well, no, it was one where it like ran some sort of command where it like deleted some like important settings on your computer or something,
Right.
where you have to factory install. That's what I read at least. This was, I mean, I didn't verify it. It was just something I saw in my feed, but
wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the other thing that I found, sorry, I cut you off, but is that I mean, you're so close, so you just end up like asking it, like we're almost there, and then you kind of just like you don't want to stop and like do it yourself because it's so easy to just like one more time, like one more prompt, it's gonna solve it. One more prompt. So I've had to start to be like, okay, I need to jump out of this faster. It's good to like get it to like write a lot of the boilerplate and stuff, but then have to kind of snap out of it and go back to good old coding, because I just get in this. It's like when you're eating potato chips, just like one more, it's gonna be fine. Just one more, one more, and then just one more, and then you start getting annoyed. And I talked to this other guy about it, where both of us like we were in like a little bit of a bad mood because we were so happy because it was so good, and then it just started like being obnoxious and annoying, and then you start kind of like
Right.
having like a petty fight with the AI, which is,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
feel like you're
Yeah.
fighting someone. So like when you leave that kind of conversation, you're like in a you feel like somebody has been like slighting you. So I think it's it's a fun time. But I think that's one thing to like be mindful of, is like when you start getting into this, like just one more, like it's so close, or like when you're starting to get annoyed and you're a little bit like in the keyboard,
Yeah.
it's time to
Right.
step away, go for a walk, and then actually do some coding with your brain, because this
Yeah.
is not
Yeah. Actually, start
beneficial
using
for
it.
anyone.
Right. Yeah. But I guess the opposite thing is true as well. Because I still catch myself doing like some of those like stupid, mundane, repetitive tasks. Like maybe I start with using AI and then switch back into writing it myself. But at some point, you're just like, I don't know, create a 20s variant of the same task with like slightly different params or
Mhm.
whatever.
No point in doing it
Then
yourself.
also, exactly, no point of doing it yourself. But you also have to remind yourself, like, hey, maybe now's a good time, and now you're at a repetitive, mundane, and sort of stupid thing. Maybe go back to the AI thing and let it do that stuff for you, because I feel like that was the that was what really worked well when I was doing the API documentation, where I would just like write one example and then have it generate the 5 other languages based on that. That
Mhm.
worked really well.
Mhm.
So yeah, interesting
Yeah.
times.
Interesting times. Interesting times. Well, I guess we'll see each other in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think so too. And
Until then.
until then, and tell us what you solved with AI. Let us know.
Let us know what you solved with AI. And we'll see you around the interwebs.
See you.
Bye-bye.